Have you ever felt like there's an invisible force pulling you back just when you're about to move forward? You set a goal, you commit to change, and for a while everything goes well. But then, without warning, something shifts. You start missing deadlines, making excuses, or sabotaging relationships that were finally going right. It feels as if some unseen part of you is working against everything you've been striving for. But why? Why do we sabotage our own success, our happiness, our growth? This isn't just a personal struggle. It's a universal pattern, one that plays out in ways both subtle and extreme. The promising artist who never finishes their work, the entrepreneur who backs away from an opportunity just before it takes off, the person who craves love but unconsciously pushes it away. This cycle of self-sabotage is not random, nor is it simply a matter of willpower. It has deep roots, hidden within the layers of the unconscious mind. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychological thinkers of all time, devoted much of his life to uncovering these hidden forces. He discovered that self-sabotage is not failure, nor is it weakness. It is a conflict between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, a battle between the self you know and the self you've buried. And until you bring that buried self into the light, it will continue to control you from the shadows. Today we're diving into Jung's revolutionary insights to answer a crucial question: why do we get in our own way? More importantly, how do we break free from the unconscious patterns that hold us back? Before we can understand why we sabotage ourselves, we need to understand the man who gave us the tools to decode this mystery. Carl Gustav Jung, born in 1875, was not just a psychologist, he was a pioneer of the human mind. He began as a close collaborator of Sigmund Freud, but eventually broke away, developing his own groundbreaking theories that reshaped modern psychology. Unlike Freud, who believed the unconscious was primarily a reservoir of repressed desires, Jung saw it as something much larger, an active force shaping our behaviors, decisions, and the very stories we tell ourselves. Jung identified two layers of the unconscious: the personal unconscious, which contains our individual experiences, fears, and forgotten memories, and the collective unconscious, a deeper, universal layer shared by all humans, containing ancient psychological patterns he called archetypes. Many of the concepts we take for granted today, introverts and extroverts, psychological complexes, the idea of a persona, all originated with Jung. Jung was a persona, but perhaps his most important contribution to understanding self-sabotage is his concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we have disowned, denied, or suppressed. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In other words, the forces that sabotage us are not random. They are unexamined parts of ourselves acting out in ways we don't fully understand. So, what exactly is self-sabotage from a Jungian perspective? It is when unconscious forces work against our conscious desires, creating invisible resistance just as we are about to make progress. It is not mere bad luck, it is a pattern, a silent internal battle between the life we want and the hidden fears, beliefs, and traumas that resist change. This conflict plays out in countless ways: procrastination, delaying important tasks even when we know the cost; self-medication, turning to substances, food, or distractions to numb discomfort instead of facing it; relationship sabotage, pushing away people we love just as things get serious; career self-limitation, avoiding opportunities or creating unnecessary conflicts that hold us back. The pattern is clear: just when we are about to move forward, something deep within us pulls the brakes. But why? Because the unconscious mind is not designed for success, it is designed for survival. And survival, to the unconscious, means staying within the familiar. Even if what is familiar is unhealthy, painful, or limiting, it is known. And the unknown, even when it holds the promise of something better, is terrifying. Jung's concept of the shadow is crucial here. The shadow is made up of all the parts of ourselves we have rejected or suppressed: our strength, our confidence, our ability to set boundaries, our deepest desires. If we were taught to see ambition as selfish, we may unconsciously sabotage success to avoid guilt. If we were conditioned to believe love comes with pain, we may push away relationships before we can get hurt. The unconscious isn't trying to destroy us, it's trying to protect us from what it perceives as a threat. But that protection often keeps us trapped in cycles of self-destruction. So, how do we break free? Jung's work gives us the answer: integration. The only way to stop self-sabotage is to become conscious of the unconscious, to face the shadow and reclaim the parts of ourselves we have disowned. If you've ever found yourself stuck in the same self-defeating cycle, ask yourself, what part of me is afraid of change? What hidden belief is pulling me back? What have I rejected in myself that I see reflected in my struggles? Because once you start asking these questions, you begin the real work, the work Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, the process of reclaiming every lost part of yourself and using it to build the life you were meant to live. And that is the key to breaking free. Why would any part of us work against our own success? Why would we sabotage the very things we claim to want? Happiness, achievement, love, health. It seems illogical, even absurd, yet time and again we find ourselves repeating the same destructive patterns, standing in our own way as if pulled by an unseen force. Carl Jung recognized this paradox and traced its origins to one of the most powerful and hidden forces within the human psyche: the shadow. It is here, in this concealed realm of the unconscious, that the roots of self-sabotage take hold, not out of malice, not out of weakness, but as part of a deeper psychological mechanism that believes, in its own distorted way, that it is protecting us. From the moment we enter the world, we begin learning what parts of ourselves are acceptable and which must be hidden. Maybe you were taught that showing anger was wrong, so you learned to suppress it. Maybe you grew up believing that vulnerability was dangerous, so you buried it beneath a mask of self-sufficiency. Maybe ambition was seen as selfish, so you dimmed your own potential. The more we suppress, the more we construct what Jung called the persona, the carefully curated mask we wear for the world. But here is the crucial truth: the parts of ourselves we deny don't simply disappear. They don't cease to exist. They retreat into the unconscious, into the shadow, where they continue to influence us in ways we cannot see. And here lies the heart of self-sabotage. The shadow isn't just a reservoir of negative traits, it holds our most vital energy. The anger we suppress could be transformed into strength. The ambition we deny could fuel purpose. The vulnerability we reject could be the key to genuine connection. But because we have exiled these parts of ourselves, they have no conscious outlet, so they emerge in distorted, destructive ways, sabotaging us just when we are on the verge of change. Consider this: if you have disowned your anger, it doesn't vanish. It turns into passive aggression, resentment, or unexplained exhaustion. If you have suppressed your ambition, you may unconsciously undermine others' success while never fully stepping into your own potential. If you have rejected your need for connection, you might push people away, just as intimacy becomes possible. The shadow does not disappear. It acts out from the depths, influencing our choices, shaping our behaviors, and ensuring that we remain trapped in cycles we do not understand. And then there's projection. When we refuse to face certain parts of ourselves, we see them reflected in others. The person who triggers you the most, the one whose arrogance, weakness, or selfishness infuriates you, may be carrying an aspect of your own shadow. Jung famously said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The anger we feel toward them may not be about them at all. It may be a message from the unconscious, calling us to reclaim the very traits we have buried. But the shadow isn't the only force at play. Another key source of self-sabotage is what modern Jungians might call the wounded inner child, the part of us carrying unresolved pain from early experiences. Jung identified this phenomenon as the formation of complexes, clusters of unconscious emotional energy that can be triggered by present-day situations. These complexes often drive our most self-destructive behaviors. Consider repetition compulsion, our unconscious tendency to recreate painful situations from the past. To the outside world, it may look like self-sabotage, but to the unconscious, it is an attempt at mastery. If you experienced abandonment as a child, you might unconsciously push people away or choose emotionally unavailable partners, not because you want to be alone, but because your psyche is trying to recreate the situation in an attempt to finally resolve it. The logic of the unconscious is different from that of the conscious mind. It doesn't seek happiness, it seeks resolution. and until we bring awareness to these patterns, they will repeat. Parental complexes play an especially powerful role in shaping self-sabotage. If you had a highly critical father, you may internalize that voice, sabotaging your achievements with relentless self-doubt. If your mother was emotionally distant, you may struggle to accept love, even when it is freely given. These patterns develop as survival strategies, ways to navigate childhood environments that once felt unsafe. But the problem is, we don't leave them behind. We carry them into adulthood, applying them to situations where they no longer serve us. Jung's insight was clear. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. But that choice requires understanding how the past continues to shape the present. Yet, for all its destruction, self-sabotage is not merely dysfunction. In many cases, it serves an unconscious purpose. Jung understood the psyche as a self-regulating system, always seeking balance. From this perspective, self-sabotage isn't just an obstacle, it can be a signal. For instance, consider the person who is consumed by work. Their identity is built on achievement, on success. And then suddenly, they start missing deadlines, feeling burned out, losing motivation. From a Jungian perspective, this isn't laziness, it's a compensatory response. Their psyche, recognizing the imbalance, is forcing them to stop, to slow down, to reconnect with something they have neglected. This is an antiadromia, Jung's principle that when something is pushed to an extreme, its opposite force will inevitably arise. The harder we repress something, the more powerfully it emerges. Self-sabotage can also act as a defense against ego inflation. When we become too identified with a certain self-image, whether as successful, strong, or indispensable, the shadow may emerge to humble us, to remind us that we are not just our accomplishments, not just our masks. Sometimes, self-sabotage isn't about failure, it's about rediscovering balance. So how do we break free? The answer lies in integration. The only way to stop self-sabotage is to make the unconscious conscious, to face the shadow, to reclaim the lost parts of ourselves, to understand the hidden messages in our self-destructive patterns. Ask yourself, what am I suppressing that is trying to be seen? What emotions have I buried that are emerging in distorted ways? What patterns keep repeating in my life, and what might they be asking me to resolve? Because once you start asking these questions, you begin the real work, the work Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, the process of reclaiming every lost part of yourself and stepping fully into the life you were meant to live. And that is the key to breaking free. What if the very patterns that hold you back are not obstacles to be destroyed, but messages to be understood? What if self-sabotage, rather than being a sign of failure, is a signal, an invitation from the deepest parts of your psyche to reconcile what has been lost, buried, or ignored? Carl Jung understood this paradox well. He believed that self-defeating behaviors were not meaningless roadblocks, but unconscious attempts to communicate something crucial. At the core of Jung's psychology is individuation, the lifelong journey toward wholeness, toward integrating all aspects of ourselves, both light and dark. Self-sabotage, in its deepest sense, can be seen as a resistance to this process. While we may consciously desire change, success, or growth, parts of us fear what transformation requires, the death of the familiar self. Jung famously wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." This reveals an unsettling truth. We may fear becoming who we truly are even more than we fear failure. True growth demands that we let go of old identities, outdated beliefs, and protective mechanisms that, while limiting, have provided a sense of stability. The more radical the change, the more fiercely the unconscious resists it. The ego, our conscious sense of self, naturally clings to what is known, even if what is known is harmful. Jung observed, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This is why self-sabotage often intensifies in moments of potential breakthrough. The closer we come to stepping into our full potential, the stronger the resistance becomes. As Jung put it, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And yet, paradoxically, he also wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This tension between our yearning for authenticity and our fear of transformation lies at the heart of why we sabotage ourselves. Recognizing the hidden patterns of self-sabotage. To break free, we must first learn to see. Jung believed that the unconscious reveals itself in subtle yet consistent ways. Dreams are one of the most direct pathways to the shadow, often presenting recurring themes of pursuit, loss, or being unprepared. Symbolic reflections of our internal conflicts. Paying attention to these messages can illuminate the unconscious fears driving our resistance. Another powerful method Jung recommended was active imagination, a form of directed inner dialogue. Imagine your self-sabotaging behavior as a separate character with its own voice. Ask it, why do you exist? What are you protecting me from? What do you fear would happen if you stopped interfering? You may be surprised by the answers that emerge. Shadow material also reveals itself in projection. The traits that irritate us most in others are often reflections of qualities we have disowned in ourselves. As Jung famously noted, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. If you feel an intense emotional reaction towards someone's arrogance, control, or weakness, consider whether this is a mirror reflecting something within you that has been repressed. Self-sabotage is often rooted in unresolved childhood wounds. Jung observed that early experiences create what he called complexes, charged emotional patterns that, once formed, become embedded in the unconscious. These complexes shape our adult behaviors, often in ways we don't realize. Consider repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate painful situations from the past. If you experienced abandonment as a child, you might unconsciously sabotage relationships, not because you want to be alone, but because your psyche is trying to reclaim control over an experience that once overwhelmed you. The logic of the unconscious is different from the conscious mind. It seeks resolution, not happiness. Until we recognize these patterns, they will repeat. Parental complexes play an especially powerful role. If your father was overly critical, you may have internalized an inner critic that undermines your achievements. If your mother was emotionally distant, you may struggle to accept love, even when it is freely given. These patterns were once survival strategies. They helped us navigate an environment that felt unsafe. But, as Jung taught, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. The hidden purpose of self-sabotage. Jung viewed the psyche as a self-regulating system, always striving for balance. From this perspective, self-sabotage is not just dysfunction, it can be an unconscious correction. For instance, a person who is consumed by work and achievement may suddenly start missing deadlines, feeling exhausted, or losing motivation. This isn't laziness, it's the unconscious mind demanding balance. This is the principle of enantiodromia. Jung's observation that when something is taken to an extreme, its opposite force will inevitably arise. The harder we repress something, the more powerfully it resurfaces. Self-sabotage can also be a defense against ego inflation. When we become too identified with success, power, or control, the shadow may emerge to humble us, forcing us to integrate the neglected aspects of ourselves. A person who has built their identity around being needed by others might unconsciously sabotage their caregiving role, not as failure, but as an attempt to rediscover who they are beyond their obligations. The path to integration. So how do we break free? Jung's answer was integration. The only way to stop self-sabotage is to make the unconscious conscious, to face the shadow, understand its messages, and integrate the parts of ourselves we have long denied. Some practical steps include dream analysis. Record and reflect on dreams, especially those with strong emotional themes. Shadow figures often appear as unfamiliar or threatening characters, representing disowned parts of yourself. Active imagination. Engage in a dialogue with your self-sabotaging tendencies. What are they trying to protect you from? What hidden beliefs are they exposing? Symbolic understanding here? Instead of viewing self-sabotage as failure, ask, what is this behavior trying to express? If you keep procrastinating on a creative project, is it fear of failure or fear of success? If you avoid deep relationships, is it rejection you fear or true intimacy? Creative expression, art, writing, or movement can provide pathways for unconscious material to emerge in constructive ways. Honest self-inquiry journal with prompts like, what aspects of myself have I rejected? What traits do I most dislike in others? What emotions do I suppress? How do I sabotage myself most predictably? Jung emphasized that this is not about eliminating the shadow, but relating to it consciously. Repression forces it deeper into the unconscious, where it gains more power. Integration allows us to reclaim its energy in healthier forms. The aggression we once denied might become healthy assertiveness. The wildness we feared might become creativity. The vulnerability we hid might become true connection. Modern psychology has expanded on Jung's insights, with approaches like internal family systems therapy and parts work reinforcing his core idea that healing comes not from rejecting parts of ourselves, but from integrating them. Neuroscience now supports Jung's view of the unconscious, showing how implicit memory, neuroplasticity, and adaptive learning shape behaviors outside our conscious awareness. But ultimately, Jung's message remains timeless. Wholeness is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming real. It is about embracing all that we are, not just the parts we have been conditioned to accept. So, the next time you find yourself standing in your own way, ask, what part of me is trying to speak? What am I afraid of stepping into? Because the moment you begin to listen, that is the moment you begin to reclaim yourself. And that is the key to transformation. Throughout history, countless individuals have broken free from the cycle of self-sabotage, not by forcefully rejecting their patterns, but by integrating the lost parts of themselves that were buried in the shadows. These stories often follow the same path: a moment of painful awareness, the recognition of where the pattern began, an understanding of its protective function, and finally the slow, deliberate process of transformation. Carl Jung believed that true psychological growth requires something few of us are taught: the ability to hold the tension of opposites. This means resisting the urge to escape discomfort, to silence contradiction, to force an immediate resolution. Instead of choosing between strength or vulnerability, ambition or compassion, independence or connection, Jung proposed a radical idea. What if the answer is both? What if growth isn't about eliminating one side of ourselves, but integrating the contradiction into something greater? This is what Jung called the transcendent function, a new psychological perspective that emerges when we no longer see our inner conflicts as something to fix, but as a necessary part of transformation. This is why quick fixes, willpower alone, or simplistic self-improvement strategies fail to address self-sabotage. When we attempt to eliminate unwanted behaviors without first understanding their purpose, they don't disappear, they return in different forms. Resistance itself carries wisdom. Struggle contains insight. The very patterns that cause us the most frustration often hold the key to our own evolution. Jung understood that confronting the shadow is not a detour on the path of growth, it is the path. In mythology, this is the hero's journey, a universal story found in every culture. The hero does not defeat the shadow by destroying it, but by transforming it, incorporating its energy and wisdom into a fuller, more complete self. The obstacles are not just external, they are manifestations of what the hero must integrate within themselves. And so it is in our own lives. Self-sabotage is not simply an enemy to be defeated, it is a necessary encounter with the disowned parts of ourselves, the parts that must be reclaimed in order to step into the fullness of who we are. This journey toward individuation, as Jung called it, does not lead to perfection. It does not mean the absence of struggle or contradiction. Instead, it creates the capacity to hold complexity, to stand in the full reality of who we are, embracing both our light and our shadow, and making choices from a place of deep self-awareness. Maturity, in Jung's vision, is not about erasing our flaws, but about integrating all aspects of ourselves so that we are no longer ruled by what we refuse to face. So as you reflect on your own patterns of self-sabotage, I encourage you to look at them not as failures but as messages. What might these patterns be trying to protect? What unacknowledged parts of yourself might be seeking recognition? What if the resistance you feel is not a barrier but an invitation to see yourself fully, perhaps for the first time? This work requires courage, the courage to look honestly at yourself, to face what you have denied, to claim the fullness of who you are. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Today we've explored how Jung's insights reveal the deeper roots of self-sabotage, how our disowned shadow, unresolved wounds, and the self-regulating nature of the psyche often work against our conscious goals. And we've seen how the journey toward individuation is not about eliminating these forces, but integrating them, turning resistance into wisdom, fear into growth, and unconscious patterns into conscious choice. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What patterns have you noticed in your own life? What insights resonated with you the most? If you're interested in going deeper into Jung's work, I recommend starting with Man and His Symbols, or Robert Johnson's accessible introduction to shadow work, Owning Your Own Shadow. If you found value in this exploration, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with others who might benefit. Your support helps bring more content like this to life. Until next time, remember Jung's words: "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." If you've made it this far, drop 100 in the comments. It shows you are part of the 1% that's improving every single day.